Gladys Aylward. Good morning. I am Gladys Aylward, and I've been a missionary in China for almost 50 years. I was originally born in England in February of 1902. My original work in London was to be a parlor maid, and a parlor maid served several meals during the day. I kept the sitting room and the dining room and the drawing room all in order for the owners of the home, and often I got to answer the door. But it prepared me because I worked 14 to 16 hours a day for missionary service. My call, I attended a revival meeting, and the preacher spoke of dedicating one's life to the service of God. So at the age of 26, I became a probationer at China Inland Mission Center in London. But while there, I was so discouraged, I couldn't pass their examinations. And I was told I was not smart enough, and I was too stupid to learn the Chinese language. Devastating to someone at the age of 26 who wants to serve the Lord. So after leaving, I went to my very small room and opened my purse and turned it upside down, and just a few pence dropped out. So I continued to work and saved my money because I was called to China. I didn't know when I would go, and I didn't know where I would go in China. But as I was preparing, I learned about a 73-year-old missionary woman by the name of Mrs. Jeannie Lawson, and I communicated with her. And she was looking for a younger woman to carry on the work there in China. She accepted me. She accepted me, and I got to go. But I didn't have enough money, as most missionaries were going on as ships. So in October of 1930, I saved enough for a train fare. And so I set out from London with just my passport, my Bible, tickets, £2 and 9 pence to travel the Trans-Siberian Railroad, despite the fact that China and the Soviet Union were engaged in undeclared war. When I arrived in Vladivostok, I evidently got off at the wrong place, and I almost froze to death. But the Lord in His graciousness sent someone to help me. So from Vladivostok, I sailed to Japan, excuse me, and from Japan to Tientsin, then by train and by mule to the inland city of Yangqin, the mountainous province of Shanxi, a little south of Beijing. When I first got there, I learned that the Chinese people didn't trust foreigners, and they wouldn't listen to me or Mrs. Lawson, excuse me. So we studied the needs of what was needed in the area and decided to open an inn. So in Yangqing happened to be an overnight stop for mule caravans that carried coal, raw cotton, pots and pans, and iron goods. The building we were living in was actually previously an inn. So Mrs. Lawson assigned me the responsibility of preparing the inn. At 73, she didn't move as quickly as maybe some of us would have liked for her to. But so she gave me the opportunity to do this. And you can imagine it was not perfect, but it served the purposes that we were working on. So we laid in a supply of food for mules and the men. And when a caravan was coming through, I dashed out and I grabbed the rein of the lead mule and led them into our inn. We supplied good food, warm beds, and their mules were cared for at the same local prices. But one thing we did differently, we added free entertainment. We told stories about a man named Jesus. And they were astounded. They have never heard the stories of Jesus. So as the weeks progressed, the caravans turned to our inn by preference. So we were able to fund our work. Some of the travelers did come to saving faith, while others, when they would travel, they would repeat the stories that they heard at the inn. So the gospel was spread, not in any way we anticipated, but by God's way. And during that time, I religiously practiced my Chinese. And even though I was told I was stupid, God's grace was abundant, and I became fluent and comfortable with Chinese. During our time, not too long after I arrived, Mrs. Lawson suffered a severe fall and died a few days later. And I was left to run the inn and the mission alone with the aid of one Chinese Christian, Yang, the cook. And I know that all of you as missionaries too have experienced that time of being alone. But it's those times that you're alone that God becomes so real and vital. Some of the experiences that I had while there, one day the Mandarin came to visit, riding in pomp and circumstance in a sedan chair, and he told me the government had decreed to end the practice of foot binding. You'll recall that it was a sign of beauty for young girls to have their feet wrapped, but they couldn't walk for the rest of their lives. It was very, very uncomfortable because beauty was in small feet. So the Mandarin came to me and said, I want you to go talk to women. I can't go into their area, so I want you to go. And so I accepted, realizing it would give me undreamed of opportunities to spread the gospel. God again, opening doors that we never expected. During my second year, I was summoned by the Mandarin to come to see him. So I, of course, went. And he said, there's a riot going on in the men's prison, and I want you to go in and do something. I'm a woman. You want me to go in there? The soldiers were even afraid to go in, and you want me to go in? And she said, again, they said, well, how can I do that? And the warden said this to her. You have been preaching that in Jesus Christ, we have nothing to fear. So you can go. Well, I walked into the courtyard and I shouted, quiet! If you have ever known anything about me, I'm only 5 feet tall. I cannot hear when everyone is shouting at once, so choose one or two spokesmen and let me talk to them. The men quieted immediately, and I spoke with the representatives. Reporting to the warden, there were crowded conditions, there was nothing to do, there were fights over foods, so we came up with some solutions. Let's set up some looms so that they can weave cloth and earn money to buy their food. And so a few of the warden's friends donated, and the Mandarins donated some looms. They also were given a grindstone so that the men could grind grain. And at that time is when I got my name, Awide, which means virtuous one. What a name to live up to. Well, one day, I saw a woman begging by the road, and a child was accompanying her, and I learned that it didn't belong to her. So I bought, I bought the child for 9 pence. She was a girl of 5 years of age. A year later, 9 pence came in with an abandoned boy saying, I will eat less so that he can have something. And so that's how we acquired less, L-E-S-S. Our family over time grew to over 200 children, and I adopted all of them. As far as citizenship, I had been born in London, but since I was a regular visitor to the palace of the Mandarin, and I wanted to belong in China in ways that put aside all the differences of what I had grown up with. And even though the Mandarin thought it was ridiculous, Christianity was ridiculous, he did enjoy our conversations. And in 1936, I became a Chinese citizen. I lived frugally and dressed like the people around me. And this gave me greater freedom to minister to those around me. In 1938, war and the Japanese planes came and bombed the city of Yangqing, killing and causing the survivors to flee to the mountains. 5 days later, the Japanese occupied our city, Yangqing. The Mandarin decided to believe in Jesus and became a Christian. But we knew that we had to leave. He wanted us to leave, and the Mandarin said, well, what do we do with the prisoners? So we came to the conclusion that they weren't going to be beheaded this time. Normally that was what would happen. And so we made a plan for the relatives to post bonds guaranteeing their good behavior. And now, since I was behind Japanese lines, and I passed on whatever information I could to the Chinese. A Roman Catholic priest from Europe actually took up arms and was head of a guerrilla force. He sent word that they were coming in full force and his group of men were retreating, so come with us. And I sent back the note, Christians never retreat. He's, however, then sent me a copy of the handbill offering $100 for the capture, dead or alive, of the Mandarin, a prominent merchant, and me, a Wide. So I had already sent 100 children away to Xi'an, and I still had 100 children with me. So with the final 100 children in tow, we walked 12 days to the state-owned orphanage. Some nights we stayed with friendly people, but there were other nights that we were on the mountainside, unprotected from the elements. On the 12th day, we reached the Yellow River. All boat traffic was stopped, and the children wanted to know, Adiwe, how are we going to get to cross? And I responded, there are no boats. The children said, God can do anything. And so we knelt and prayed, and then we sang. A Chinese officer with a patrol had heard the singing and came by, and he heard our story and went to get us a boat. Upon our arrival, I collapsed with typhus fever and sank into delirium for several days. But God was faithful to protect the children. During that time, my personal health gradually improved, and we actually started a Christian church in Xi'an. We worked with a settlement for lepers and near the border of Tibet. But my health was permanently impaired by injuries during the war. So in 1947, for the first time, I returned to London for a badly needed operation. However, I couldn't stay there. But in 1955, I returned to the Orient and opened an orphanage in Formosa, or present-day Taiwan. I'm back. Gladys Aylward died in January 3rd, 1970. Alan Burgess wrote a book about her called The Small Woman, and a movie was made about her starring Ingrid Bergman called The Inn of the Sixth Happiness. In our library, we have two different versions, or two different authors writing about her that are over here if you're interested to learn more about her. But one of the things that I loved about learning about the life of Gladys Aylward is that there are so many things that in our lives that we make choices based on what makes us comfortable. She did not make choices that made her comfortable. She heard uncomfortable things, and yet God had a call on her life. In Luke 9:18 through 26, it says, once when Yeshua was praying in private, his Talmudim were with him, and he asked them, who are the crowds saying I am? They answered, Yochanan risen. But you, he said to them, who do you say I am? And Kepha answered, the Mashiach of God. However, he warned them not to tell this to anyone. There's another text that also says, when they were talking about this, Peter says to him, to whom will I go? To whom will we go? And when I think about ministry, and I think about what God calls us to do, again, not the comfortable, not the easy. We might have differences of opinions. We might have to be alone. But God is more than that, and he's calling us to a life of self-denial. One of the new books that one of my friends challenged me to read is called A Call to Die. You all may be familiar with it, by David Nasser. And in there, he lists all the things as he's going through. I haven't got very far because it takes a while to think about what I'm willing to deny myself in order to be ready to serve God. And as with Gladys, she served with joy, and she did it her whole life in awkward circumstances to bring honor and glory to the Lord. Thank you.